What's up, iPad letterers? Welcome back to my channel. With everything that's been happening recently, with having to stay home and having a little bit more time, I've had many people reach out to me and ask, how do I get started with iPad lettering? So I thought I'd put together this very short video for you and show you step by step what you need to get started very quickly with iPad lettering. So the first thing you need, of course, is an iPad, and there is so many different options out there, so many iPads to choose from, but it's actually quite simple. You can choose any iPad that works with an Apple Pencil. And the reason why I'm saying Apple Pencil is because no other stylus comes even close to the Apple Pencil. So I definitely recommend that you get an iPad that works with an Apple Pencil. And then the next thing you need to decide is which screen size to choose from. I've got two iPads here that I want to show you. The first one is my 12.9-inch iPad Pro, and I love this iPad. I love the screen size. It's sort of a similar size to an A4 sheet of paper, and it's really nice to hold. It's not too heavy and it fits in my handbag. But then I also have a 9.7-inch iPad. This is the 6th generation. This is not an iPad Pro. This is the one that came out early in 2018, and this is actually still a really good iPad. So you can see it doesn't really matter which iPad to choose from. Then the next thing you need is an Apple Pencil, of course, and I've got two different Apple Pencils here. So I've got that 1st generation Apple Pencil, and this is the one that works with my 9.7-inch iPad, but then I've also got the Apple Pencil 2, which is the one that works with my iPad Pro. In terms of these Apple Pencil, it doesn't matter which one you choose. You just need to make sure that you've got the one that works with whichever iPad you decide to go with. They both work exactly the same. There's not much difference between the two of them. And even the 1st generation Apple Pencil is actually still a very nice Apple Pencil, and there's nothing wrong with that. All right, so now that we've decided which iPad that we are going to use, we also need an app, of course. And in the last 4 years, I've tried pretty much every app that's out there that lends itself to hand lettering on the iPad. And my #1 recommendation is Procreate. It's hands down the best app for hand lettering, and there's no coincidence that this is currently the #1 paid app in the App Store. This is what the icon looks like. Make sure you install this on your iPad before you get started. And then I also recommend that you put the app in the dock here on your iPad so that it's easily available from wherever you are. The first thing you see when you open Procreate is your gallery. This is where all your canvases live, and it's always a good idea to organize your canvases a little bit into stacks. You can see here you can tap on a stack to open it up, and the way to create a stack is to tap on select and then tap the canvases that you want to group together. Select stack, and then you have them neatly organized. To create a new canvas, you tap on the plus sign here. You can see there is a number of pre-made sizes available, or you can also create a custom canvas size by clicking on this little plus icon here. If you're not sure which size to choose from, the screen size is always a good choice. So this is what the main working interface looks like of Procreate. You can see here the menu is at the top, and the wrench icon here, this is where all your actions are. You've got preferences here. And the first thing I want to show you is the toggle button for the light and dark interface. You will notice that my interface is light, but if you prefer the dark version, which is the default Procreate setting, then you can toggle this back so you get the dark interface. But I personally prefer the light interface, and that's why I have that toggle button turned on. Now let's go through the most important functionality that you need to know about for iPad lettering. So the first thing, of course, are the brushes. You can see we've got the brush library here, and here on the left hand side are the brush sets. And if you tap on a brush set, you can see all the brushes that are contained within the set, and you can see this is neatly organized into different categories of brushes. So calligraphy is probably one of the brush sets that you are particularly interested in, since we're talking about iPad lettering. Next up, we have the layers panel here. This is where you create new layers to separate different parts of your artwork, but I will explain how this works a little bit later in this video. And then here in the corner, you have all the color palettes, and you have different ways of representing the colors depending on your selection. So you've got different ways of selecting colors. And then here we've got the selection of color palettes as well. You can also create new palettes by clicking on the plus sign, and you can choose the default palette by tapping the set default button. So if you go back to disk mode, you can see that this palette has now been selected. This is probably my favorite view. This is that view that I would use most often when I work in Procreate. And then of course there is a lot of other functionality in Procreate as well, but I don't want to go into the details right now because that would make this video go for hours, and we don't want that. We really want to get into lettering. You can check out my other videos for detailed instructions about how to use some of these other features. Probably the biggest mistake I made myself when I started my iPad lettering journey is that I just started writing words. I didn't have any idea of the basics of lettering or calligraphy at all. I started writing words, and then I was surprised that they didn't look very good. So I didn't understand the fundamentals of lettering and calligraphy, and this is what I'm going to show you right now. I've made this cheat sheet here, and you can actually get this from my website. I'm going to put a link down in the description of this video. And you can see at the top here, these are the basic strokes. So we have got thin up strokes, we've got thick down strokes, we have got overturn strokes, we've got underturn strokes, we've got ascending loops, we've got descending loops, and then we also have ovals. And it's very important that you practice these basic strokes first, and I'm going to show you why. So if we open up the layers panel and turn on this layer here, I've color coded all the letters of the alphabet. So now what we can see here is when we look at the A, we can see here that it consists of an oval and an underturn stroke. So you can see here, this is the underturn stroke and this is the oval. So for every letter of the alphabet, you can see how they are composed of the individual strokes here. So what we want to do first is actually practice these strokes. And yes, I've got you covered because I made practice sheets for you as well. So you can get these from my website as well. It's called the iPad Lettering Starter Kit. So make sure you download those practice sheets and let's start practicing. This is the first sheet here, and the iPad Lettering Starter Kit also comes with a practice brush. Let's make sure that we select the brush first. It's called IPL Strokes Practice. If you followed my installation guide, you will most likely find the brush in the imported folder. So it's called IPL Strokes Practice. And now we're ready to practice. So all we have to do now is trace the strokes here. And you can see that the practice sheets have the gray lines that you can trace first, but then also there is a little bit of a gap here, so you can practice the strokes on your own as well. Make sure that you create a new layer if you start a new line. That way you can also monitor your progress and you can go back and see your improvements. So now let's do that. We're starting with the thin up strokes, and they are very, very thin. So the pressure you put on your pencil in a range from 1 to 10, where 1 is the lightest pressure and 10 is the hardest pressure, I would say. This is probably between a 2 and a 3. So this is really only very light pressure. So we keep doing this all the way to the end. And then of course, if you're not happy with this, you can create a new layer, turn off the visibility of this layer, and then you can start again. So now let's move on to the thick down strokes. And again, thinking about the pressure that you put on the iPad. If we compare the thin up strokes to the thick down strokes, the thin up strokes were probably a 2 or a 3, and then the thick down strokes are probably a 7 or an 8. If you are struggling with this, if you can't get the thick down strokes, I recommend that you adjust the size of the brush. This slider here lets you adjust the size of the brush. It was set to about 12 or 13 to start with, but if you find that you can't get enough pressure on the brush, try increasing the size a little bit, and then you can get those thick strokes without having to put too much pressure on the brush, and see if this works a little bit better for you. So we carry on with this as well. And then the next one up is a variation of the thick down strokes. It's got this little curve at the end. And the reason why we're practicing this is because this actually makes your letters look very nice once we start writing actual words. There's this ever so slight little curve at the top and the bottom of your stroke. So this is very nice to practice as well and get a feel for the brush. And then we're also going to practice the overturn stroke, and what you want to pay attention here is this transition right at this point. This is where it goes from thin to thick, and this is where you need to slow down and make sure that you're not going too fast to really create a nice transition. So we're starting with the thin up stroke, and then when we get about here, we're starting to put on the pressure and then finish up with the thick downstroke. And you'll also notice that the first attempt usually is not that good. So this is definitely one of the drills that you want to do a few times to get it just right. All right, now let's move on to the second set of strokes. So now we're going to practice the underturn strokes, and this is the exact opposite of the overturn stroke. We're actually starting with the thick downstrokes and then taking the pressure off and then finishing with the thin upstroke. Next up are the ascending loops, and they look a little bit like an L, so it's quite handy that you're practicing these because then that means you can already write an L. And they consist of a thin upstroke coming around, having a thick downstroke, and then finish up with a thin upstroke again. Alright, now we're moving on to the descending loops. They start with a thick downstroke, and then we come around and finish with a thin upstroke, and you can see that they almost look a little bit like the letter J. They are also used for a G and a Y, so again, very, very important to practice these. All right, and then last but not least, we have the ovals, and you can see that they look a little bit like O. And with the ovals, I recommend that you're starting here in the center of the back of the oval with the thin upstroke, and then coming around and then finishing with the thin upstroke again. And this makes it much easier to have the strokes meet here again. So let's do it again. And then you can see here that we have a nice closure of our loop. So this will definitely require quite a bit of practice. And I recommend that you do this for an extended period of time until you are completely comfortable with tracing the lines here. All right, and then once you feel comfortable with tracing these strokes, that's when we move on to letters. And now, of course, it makes it much easier to practice your letters because you already know the individual components of each letter. So this is really a good way to practice, and this will get you started in no time. So now that you've seen how to get started with iPad lettering, how to practice the basic strokes, but then also how to put together the letters, I highly recommend that you watch my iPad lettering Getting Started series. It's a whole series where I'm using the exact same practice sheets and I'm explaining in much more details how to write these letters. You can also learn how to write uppercase letters, how to write numbers, and then we're going to put everything together and we're also going to learn how to write words, which is of course what we want. Let me know if you found this helpful by giving me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and share this video with your friends and family who might be interested in learning iPad lettering from scratch as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.